Okay, we'll get started, and if we have other people join us from the waiting room, we'll bring them in as they come. So this afternoon, I just have a few norms for us. If you wouldn't mind muting your microphones so that we can start with me presenting and then open it up for any questions that you have at the end of the presentation. I think I know where you're from that are on the call, but if you wouldn't mind putting your school initials next to your name or just letting me know in the chat what school district you're with, that will help me with any of the questions that you have. Speaking of the chat, if you would like to use the chat to ask any questions while I'm presenting through the slides, and then at the end, there will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation where I'll turn the recording off. This session is being recorded. The purpose of that is so that you can share it with your other teachers and you can share it with your administration and anyone else that would like to have this knowledge that can't join us right now at noon today. And I was sharing with Lisa that at any time, if you have recommendations on topics that you would like to share with us, you can email me there. My email address is listed and I'll have that at the end of the presentation as well, so that you can send me any of your topic recommendations. So today our focus really is going to be on the Science of Reading 101 and talking about the models of reading and what the research shows us is effective practice. So for our agenda for this hour of time today, we're really going to talk about the what, the why, the how, the who, and the where with science of reading. So by definition, according to Collins Dictionary, a model of a system or process is a theoretical description that you understand. You can help you understand how a system or process works or how it might work. So trying to keep that in the back of our minds while we go through these models today. What is this theoretical description? So why are models important, and why do we as educators of young children learning how to read, why do we need to know them? Why should we be having them in front of us? Ultimately, the choice of the framework that we decide to follow with our instruction will drive every single decision that we make in our classroom, every decision that we make with curriculum or our materials that we're using, our programs, assessments, and what assessments we're using, how often we're using them with our students. These models should also be used during our data team meetings, our discussions with parents and families on their students' needs and how we're going to proceed with their instructional plan. It can help us with grouping students using data to group for those interventions. And finally, it can really help with our referral process when we're making that step into a special education referral with a child, using these models to explain what our basis of that referral is coming from. So how do we go about taking the knowledge from all of these different models over time and creating what I like to call a supermodel, things that help us in our classrooms daily? That's hopefully what we're going to do this afternoon. So first of all, understanding that reading is a process. We're trying to teach our children to learn this process of reading. And to start doing that, we as educators need to make sure we understand that students learn to read from speech to print. Our language and understanding the language of English happens usually at an early age when we're exposed to conversation and oral language. Our students are exposed to speech at a very early age and they're picking up the language that they hear and see around them. However, when they come to school-age children or sometimes children starting preschool, they're exposed to that print, and that's when we're moving them from the speech, understanding our language, to understanding the print of our language and decoding the text or getting ready to crack the code. One recent publication that I want to bring your attention to, if you're not aware already, is the book Speech to Print that was published by the author Louisa Moats. This is a second edition. It's Language Essentials for Teachers. And if this is not something you have on your bookshelf, I highly recommend you taking a look at it. There are great Facebook groups right now that are encouraging the reading of speech to print, and they're having author talks and different groups talking through this book. So it's a great way to understand that speech to print idea. I thought I'd include this slide this afternoon to talk to you about this is your brain, and then this is your brain on reading. So making sure we as educators know what parts of our brain is controlling different parts of the reading process. For example, If you look here where the yellow is, that's really the part that's controlling the motor plans for handwriting and that fine motor eye-hand coordination. A lot of our students are working online through the hybrid model or through an online learning model this school year. We're all trying to navigate that, but remembering the importance of getting that handwriting in, making sure that they're having that paper pencil connection is really important as well. So we're going to start with the first model of reading this afternoon, coming from Goff and Tumner from 1986. This is something that those of you watching might be aware of or have been exposed to. This is considered the simple view of reading. Simple view of reading is broken down into word recognition, language comprehension, and reading comprehension. However, when Goff and Tumner titled it the simple view of reading, a lot of people are laughing at that or having a little bit of pushback because, of course, anything you view can be viewed in a simple way. If we take the analogy of the solar system, this is a simple view of the solar system. When our children start to learn about the solar system, we might start with something like this. And then as they get older and we're trying to explain and get a deeper understanding of the solar system, we might give them a visual looking like this, where they're getting more information to add to their understanding of not just the planets, but now exploring more of the solar system in general. And as they grow older, we're getting more complex into giving them an even more complex view of the solar system. So not so simple view, and continues. Same thing goes with the simple view of reading. So if we want to break that down and get more complex, as we did with our solar system, the simple view of reading, like I said, starts with word recognition. And in that box, for lack of a better term, we have decoding. Underneath decoding, we talk about phonological awareness, the sounds that we hear, understanding that those sounds are represented by speech. And then moving into phonics and advanced phonics, knowing that those sounds that we're speaking are represented by letter and print, and then ultimately getting our students to understand words by sight automatically, having that automaticity of knowing the word and no longer having to decode and read through every letter, but now knowing them by sight. That's Goff and Tumner's word recognition. Next, their second box is language comprehension. And underneath that category comes the understanding of their background knowledge and what vocabulary base do these students have? What is their understanding of our language and their verbal reasoning? And notice in their simple view of reading, in between those two boxes, they use a multiplication symbol. And that's going to become important as we talk about this simple view of reading. Ultimately, putting the word recognition in combination with the language comprehension, we will ultimately find ourselves with readers that have reading comprehension. But again, like I said, you have to have a multiplier, not just one or the other can stand alone. And here's an example of that. So if I would give you this in front of you, assuming that you don't have fluency with this language, you would find yourself not having any of the word recognition with that, as well as no language comprehension with that example, ultimately giving you 0 in the reading comprehension category. If I gave you this example, the letters might look familiar to you. However, the language is probably not familiar to you. So using this example, we do have word recognition possibly. However, multiplied by 0 language comprehension, 1 times 0 still gives us that 0 reading comprehension. Looking at the last example then, if I gave you this, you might not know the decoding of some of that font that's in front of you. However, if you read through it, what's the weather forecast for today, you would have the language comprehension of what's the weather forecast for today. But multiplied by not having the word recognition still ultimately gives you a 0 in the reading comprehension category. So all of that means that we have to give students with tools in both of these categories to end up getting any type of reading comprehension as their output. The second model I wanted to share with you and break down this afternoon is the 4-part processor. And the 4-part processor was originally created by Scheinenberg and McClelland in 1989, as well as Adams in 1990. And this 4-part processor really takes a look at the phonological processor, being the sounds that we hear, the orthographic processor being the print to speech. Ultimately, those two feed into our meaning processor, which is making sense of what we hear and what we're seeing. And then the output of all of those together gives us our context processor. We can overlay the big five in reading and think about the bottom two being the phonemic awareness and the phonics, the phonological awareness and the orthographic processor. Those two feeding into that meaning processor or our vocabulary. Ultimately, having fluency among all of those is where Adams was saying our students are finally going to understand things that are informational or the sentence context or our text structure. So what is one similarity and two differences between the two models? For lack of time, instead of opening it up to those of you on the call, I'll just share with you. If we overlap these two models on top of each other, we can see that the word recognition that was with the simple view of reading overlaps with this four-part processor on the bottom, and our language comprehension overlaps with our four-part processor really with the top of the model. So we can see the similarities and the differences there. One major difference with these is that our researchers with a simple view of reading really believe that you have to have some of each to get to that ultimate goal, whereas the four-part processor is not laid out that way. This is just showing you, again, those two models overlapped on top of each other, and I color-coded them so that you can get a little bit more of an understanding with that. The yellow is that word recognition, phonemes and sounds, and putting the phonics with it. And then the blue more is our vocabulary and our background knowledge and understanding of what we're reading. The next model is something that I know most of you are familiar with. This is Hollis Scarborough's reading rope. And this one is my favorite. This is one that I keep by my desk often, especially when I'm going into data team meetings to remind myself to tease out each of these categories. So when we look at Hollis Scarborough's thoughts on developing these skilled readers, that's ultimately our goal. She talks about using language comprehension and word recognition similar to the last model we explored. But in this model, in this rope, she takes that language comprehension and breaks it down into those categories of background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, the verbal reasoning, and then our literacy knowledge, our understanding of print concepts and genres. She talks about taking those categories and weaving them together. As you can see the bottom of her rope, you notice phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition, that automaticity. And she added those arrows showing you that when we increase strategic intervention, when we increase automaticity, we get that skilled reader. This can be overlapped with the other models that we've shared already. So far, we can see the word recognition, language comprehension. Doesn't matter which research model you want to look at that we've looked at so far, they're using the same major headings and components. Lene Airy is the next researcher I wanted to take a look at, and her research started in 1999. And you can see that Lene Airy discusses the reader, the emergent reader, regardless of age, goes through 4 phases in their development. She explains the pre-alphabetic phase as a early emergent reader that actually does not have any phoneme grapheme connections yet. This child or student doesn't really understand that our sounds in our language are corresponding to a print in our language. The second phase in Airy's development is the early alphabetic phase. And in this phase, she does say that they do develop that phoneme grapheme connection. There's a little bit of decoding going on, and there's awareness with phonemes at a slight level. The later alphabetic phase is really where they get that complete phonemic awareness. The phoneme grapheme connection is there, and we do have early sight recognition with some automaticity with some of those sight words. Ultimately, where we want all of our readers to get is to Lene Airy's consolidated phase. And in the consolidated phase, this is where they're decoding words proficiently. We're moving from having that awareness to that proficiency of the sounds, of the morphemes, of the word families. So that's where we want all of our skilled readers to be. This is an example of where those phases would be if I was asking an emergent reader in the pre-alphabetic phase to show me or represent the word lunch in writing. This is a student that maybe watches someone scribble down a grocery list and they're just mimicking. They know that there's a print involved, but they're not sure what that grapheme phoneme connection is. Whereas you can see in the early alphabetic phase that changes quite a bit, where they're connecting those graphemes to the phonemes that they hear and get a few of them down. The later alphabetic phase, we can see they're getting more of that one-to-one with the sounds that they hear and the graphemes that represent those sounds. And ultimately, like I said, in the consolidated phase, we get the correct spelling where we're hearing all of the sounds represented by the word, or all of the graphemes, excuse me, represented by the sounds in lunch. So all of this is great knowledge to have, but when would we use these models and why would we pull them out to use them? So some of my recommendations would be in a faculty meeting, making sure that your staff has the understanding of these models and the background of all the researchers' hard work and where learning to read, why it is called a science. I already mentioned data team meetings. This is a great time. I love to pull Hollis Scarborough's rope out, making sure that we're using our data and asking ourselves questions like, where are the holes? What interventions do we need to put in place? What skills are our students secure in already that part of the rope is already there? When we're doing special education referrals and getting ready to make goals for students, making sure we're getting specific on what their needs are, and using these models helps us with that. And finally, during parent-teacher conferences, we're not going to pull out the simple view of reading at a parent-teacher conference, right? However, it's a really good way to show parents what our students are already successful at and where they're still learning and where we're intervening in. So again, models are important because they do drive every single decision that we're making, or they should be driving every single decision that we're making, whether it's curriculum, what resources we're using, what programs we're using, how we're assessing students, or those discussions that we just talked about. So I'm going to open it up to questions that all of you have. I do want to let you know that there is a feedback form available here at the link. I will also post the feedback form in the chat for you so that you know how to get to that if you're watching this at a different time. And I'm going to stop my recording now, give you my contact information, stop my recording and open it up to any questions that all of you have.